Former Navy Petty Officer Second Class Robert Mitchell was traveling alone through the Chicago subway system when a massive power outage disabled the electronic announcements and elevator systems that he relied on for navigation, leaving him stranded in an underground maze where his combat-related blindness made independent travel impossible without the audio cues and familiar landmarks that guided his daily commute. Robert had lost his sight to an IED explosion during his final deployment in Afghanistan, and while he had successfully adapted to civilian life with mobility training and assistive technology, the subway emergency created conditions where none of his usual navigation methods could function effectively. The power failure also disabled emergency communication systems and trapped hundreds of commuters in darkened stations. But Robert's situation was particularly dangerous because his inability to see exit signs or follow crowd movements meant he could become permanently lost in tunnels that stretched for miles beneath the city. But Ranger, his specially trained guide dog who had been navigating Chicago's complex transit system with Robert for 3 years, possessed the spatial memory and problem-solving abilities needed to guide his veteran through 12 subway stations and multiple tunnel connections to reach safety. When all electronic navigation aids had failed and human assistance was unavailable, for 4 hours in complete darkness, Ranger used his intimate knowledge of the subway layout to lead Robert through an underground journey that would test every aspect of his guide dog training and demonstrate the remarkable capabilities that make these partnerships literally life-saving for veterans whose service-connected disabilities require specialized support. Welcome to Saved by Tales. Before we dive into this remarkable story of adaptive navigation meeting urban crisis, and a guide dog's determination to overcome technological failures that threatened his veterans' safety, join our community of animal hero enthusiasts who understand that some journeys require 4-legged navigators whose training and memory can succeed when modern technology fails those who depend on it most. Robert Mitchell had spent 2 years learning to navigate Chicago's public transportation system after losing his sight in Afghanistan, developing routes and techniques that allowed him to travel independently throughout the city for work and personal activities. Robert's navigation skills are remarkable, his mobility instructor Sarah Walsh often observed. He's memorized an incredible network of routes and landmarks that allow him to travel anywhere in the city with confidence. The subway system presented unique challenges for blind travelers, requiring memorization of station layouts, platform configurations and audio cues that could provide navigation information when visual landmarks weren't available. Ranger, a 4-year-old German Shepherd, had been specially trained as a guide dog with expertise in urban navigation, obstacle avoidance, and public transportation systems that served veterans with visual disabilities. Ranger isn't just Robert's eyes, explained guide dog instructor Dr. Jennifer Martinez. He's a navigation specialist who has memorized complex route patterns and can make real-time decisions about safe travel when standard systems fail. The electrical grid failure that hit downtown Chicago during evening rush hour was sudden and comprehensive, disabling not only subway lighting but also the automated announcement systems that blind travelers relied on for station identification and navigation. "I was on my normal route home from work," Robert would later explain to investigators. "Everything was routine until the lights went out and all the audio systems went silent." The power outage created immediate challenges for all subway passengers, but Robert's blindness made the situation particularly dangerous as crowd movements and emergency protocols couldn't provide the navigation assistance that sighted passengers could access. Ranger's response to the emergency was immediate and professional, using training that had prepared him for exactly this type of situation where his veteran would need enhanced guidance through challenging environments. "I felt Ranger's behavior change the moment the power went out," Robert recalled. "He went from normal walking mode into high alert guidance mode and I knew we were facing something unusual." With electronic systems disabled and normal audio landmarks unavailable, Robert found himself in an underground environment where his usual navigation methods were useless and crowd panic could easily separate him from safety. "The silence was the worst part," Robert explained. "Without the automated announcements, I had no way to know which station we were at or which direction we needed to go." Ranger's spatial memory and route knowledge became critical as he began systematic navigation that would guide Robert through multiple stations using landmarks and path recognition that existed independently of electronic systems. The German Shepherd's navigation included obstacle avoidance in crowded conditions where panicked passengers created unpredictable movement patterns that could injure or disorient travelers with visual disabilities. "Ranger was making decisions about our route," Robert observed. He was choosing paths I had never taken before, but I trusted his judgment because his training prepared him for emergencies like this. Ranger's guidance through the darkened subway system required sophisticated crowd navigation as hundreds of stranded passengers created chaotic conditions where normal pedestrian flow patterns were disrupted by panic and confusion. The German Shepherd's training included techniques for protecting his veteran from crowd pressure while maintaining forward progress towards safety through environments where visibility was zero for all travelers. People were pushing and trying to find exits, Robert recalled, but Ranger kept me moving in a steady direction, avoiding the areas where crowds were getting dangerous. Ranger's route selection demonstrated remarkable problem-solving as he avoided bottlenecks and dangerous crowd concentrations while maintaining progress towards stations with emergency lighting and evacuation routes. The guide dog's protective positioning shielded Robert from the worst crowd pressure while ensuring that their movement remained systematic rather than random during the chaotic emergency conditions. Ranger's navigation through the subway emergency required keeping track of station stops and tunnel connections as they traveled through 12 different stations to reach a location with functional emergency systems and safe evacuation options. I lost count of how many stations we passed through, Robert admitted, but Ranger seemed to know exactly where we were and where we needed to go. The German Shepherd's spatial memory included platform layouts, stairway locations and connection points that allowed him to navigate complex route changes when their normal path was blocked by emergency conditions. Ranger's decision-making included avoiding areas where emergency crews were working and choosing alternate routes that would eventually lead to safety without creating additional complications for emergency responders. Ranger was making strategic choices about our path, Robert observed. He would pause at decision points, assess our options, and then confidently choose the direction that would keep us moving towards safety. After 2 hours of systematic navigation through the darkened subway system, Ranger's endurance and determination remained strong despite the physical and mental demands of guiding Robert through increasingly complex route decisions. We were walking much farther than my normal commute, Robert noted. Ranger was taking us through parts of the system I had never been to before, but he never hesitated or seemed uncertain about the direction. The German Shepherd's navigation demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of Chicago's subway layout that exceeded the typical routes he and Robert used for daily travel, showing problem-solving abilities that drew on extensive training. Ranger's protective behavior included regular assessment of Robert's condition and pace adjustment to ensure that his veteran could maintain the endurance needed for their extended emergency journey. I was getting tired, but Ranger seemed to understand that we needed to keep moving, Robert recalled. He would pause for brief rests but never stopped our forward progress towards safety. Ranger's guide dog training included emergency procedures that prepared him to seek assistance from official personnel when available, but the scope of the power outage meant that normal emergency response was overwhelmed. We encountered a few emergency workers along the way, Robert remembered, but they were dealing with so many people that Ranger seemed to understand we needed to keep moving rather than wait for individual assistance. The German Shepherd's navigation continued to prioritize self-reliance and systematic progress towards safety, rather than depending on emergency personnel who were managing system-wide crisis conditions. Ranger's route selection showed preference for areas with emergency lighting and functional communication systems where they might eventually find comprehensive assistance for Robert's safe evacuation. Ranger was looking for the right kind of help, Robert observed. He passed by some emergency stations but kept going until we reached a location where the systems were actually working. After 4 hours of underground navigation, Ranger's systematic route planning finally led them to a station where backup power systems were maintaining basic emergency services and communication capabilities. Suddenly I could hear announcements again, Robert said with relief. Ranger had led us to a station where the emergency systems were actually functional. The German Shepherd's navigation had successfully guided Robert through 12 stations and multiple tunnel connections to reach one of the few locations in the system where blind travelers could access the electronic assistance they needed. We made it to the LaSalle station, Robert told emergency personnel. My guide dog navigated us here from the financial district through the entire power outage. Ranger's tail wagging indicated that he understood their emergency journey was complete, and that they had successfully reached a location where Robert could receive appropriate assistance for safe evacuation. Emergency personnel at the LaSalle station were amazed by Ranger's successful navigation through the subway emergency and immediately provided Robert with the assistance needed for safe return to street level. That dog navigated you through 12 stations in complete darkness, observed emergency coordinator Mike Rodriguez. That's remarkable navigation under impossible conditions. The evacuation process included elevator access to street level where Robert could continue his journey home using surface transportation that wasn't affected by the subway power failure. Ranger saved us both, Robert told emergency workers as they prepared to leave the subway system. Without his navigation skills, I could have been lost down there indefinitely. The successful completion of their underground emergency journey demonstrated the remarkable capabilities of guide dogs whose training could overcome technological failures that threatened veterans with visual disabilities. Robert's emergence from the subway system was met by his wife Linda Mitchell, who had been worried about his safety during the widespread power outage that had affected downtown Chicago. When I heard about the subway emergency, I was terrified that Robert might be trapped underground, Linda said as she embraced her husband. Ranger brought him home safely when all the normal systems failed. Robert's condition was excellent despite his 4-hour underground journey, demonstrating both his personal resilience and Ranger's effectiveness in maintaining safe travel through challenging conditions. The successful navigation was particularly remarkable given the scope of the emergency and the number of stranded passengers who had required rescue assistance from emergency services. Ranger's subway navigation became a landmark case for guide dog training programs, demonstrating problem-solving abilities and spatial memory that exceeded typical expectations for service animal capabilities. Ranger's navigation through the Chicago subway emergency represents exceptional guide dog performance, explained Dr. Martinez. His route planning and decision-making saved Robert from what could have been a dangerous situation. The case was featured in guide dog training curricula and emergency preparedness programs for individuals with visual disabilities who relied on public transportation for daily mobility. Ranger proved that properly trained guide dogs can overcome technological failures and provide navigation assistance that exceeds electronic systems, noted mobility specialist Dr. Sarah Walsh. Robert's experience during the subway emergency contributed to enhanced accessibility protocols and backup systems designed to better serve passengers with disabilities during infrastructure failures. Ranger's successful navigation highlighted gaps in our emergency systems for passengers with visual disabilities, acknowledged Transit Authority Coordinator Dr. Lisa Chen. We've implemented improvements based on lessons learned from this incident. The improvements included backup audio systems and enhanced emergency communication protocols that would provide better support for disabled passengers during future power outages. Robert and Ranger's subway experience inspired advocacy for improved accessibility in public transportation and enhanced emergency preparedness for individuals with service-connected disabilities. Ranger demonstrated that guide dogs can provide navigation assistance that electronic systems can't match. Robert explained during speaking engagements at veteran organizations, but we also need infrastructure that supports disabled veterans during emergencies. Their partnership was featured in disability rights initiatives and veteran support programs that highlighted the ongoing challenges faced by veterans with service-connected disabilities. Years later, Robert and Ranger continued using Chicago's public transportation with enhanced confidence in their ability to handle emergency situations and technological failures. Ranger proved that we don't have to be helpless when systems fail, Robert reflected. He showed me that his training and memory can overcome almost any navigation challenge. Their story continued to inspire guide dog programs and accessibility advocacy, demonstrating that properly trained service animals could provide independence and safety that exceeded technological solutions for veterans whose disabilities required specialized support. Ranger had proven that some navigation systems come with 4 legs, extraordinary memory, and the problem-solving abilities that can guide veterans to safety when the modern world's electronic assistance fails those who depend on it most. I still think about that Chicago evening when a massive power outage plunged the subway system into darkness while a blind veteran found himself trapped in underground tunnels where his normal navigation methods became useless and crowd panic threatened to separate him permanently from any hope of finding safety. If Ranger had been just a companion instead of a navigation specialist, if he'd lacked the spatial memory to guide Robert through 12 stations in complete darkness, If he'd been anything less than a professional who understood that some journeys require guides whose training exceeds electronic systems, Robert Mitchell would have remained lost in those tunnels while emergency responders remained overwhelmed by system-wide crisis conditions. Ranger's story teaches us something profound about the specialized partnerships between veterans with service-connected disabilities and guide dogs whose training can overcome technological failures that threaten the independence that disabled veterans work so hard to maintain in civilian life.